Small Town Horror Stories, Story 1, The Smiling Man at Riverside. So I want to start tonight with a story that happened in a small town called Riverside. It's one of those places where everybody knows everybody, you know? Population maybe 5,000. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and they actually mean it. This story takes place in the fall of 2019, and it involves a man named Derek Paulson. Derek was normal enough, worked at the local hardware store, lived alone in a house just outside of town. Nothing remarkable about him. Neighbors saw him occasionally. He'd wave. He seemed fine. But then people started noticing something weird. There was a stretch of road on the edge of town just past the old lumber mill. It was a quiet road. Not many people drove it, especially at night. And that's where people started reporting something strange. A figure just standing there, on the side of the road. At first, people thought it was nothing, maybe someone broken down. But then more reports came in. And they all said the same thing, this figure, it was always smiling. Just standing there on the shoulder, even when cars passed, even when it was pouring rain. Smiling. One local, a guy named Tom, he told his wife about it after he'd driven past 3 times in a week. He said, "There's this guy just standing out there. Every time I go past, he's in a different spot, but he's always smiling. It's not a normal smile, you know." His wife thought he was exaggerating, but then she saw it too. By the 3rd week of October, people weren't driving that road if they could help it. Parents warned their kids. The local Facebook group had posts about it. Does anyone know who that guy is on Mill Road? People were genuinely scared. Not terrified, but unsettled. There's a difference. The police got involved. Officer Jenny Watts, she was one of the few cops in this small town. She drove out there one afternoon to investigate. She found nothing. No one on the road. No signs of anyone having been there. But she did notice something. There were footprints in the dirt near the tree line. Dozens of them. All in one spot. Like someone had been standing there for hours, or maybe multiple times in exactly the same place. Officer Watts reported it. But without anyone to question, without any actual crime being committed, there wasn't much to do. Then on October 28th, something changed. A girl named Sarah Chen, she was 17, and she was driving home from her friend's house around 9 at night. She had to take Mill Road. She didn't want to, but it was the fastest way. Her mom was picking her up, so she figured she'd be fine. Sarah drove slowly, carefully. She was nervous, obviously. Everyone in town knew about the smiling man. But as she got to the stretch where people had reported seeing him, she didn't see anything. She felt relief washing over her. Maybe it was all just paranoia. Maybe people had just spooked each other, and that's when she saw him. He was standing maybe 30 feet ahead, right in the middle of the road. Completely still. And even in her headlights, she could see it. That smile. It was too wide, too wrong. Sarah hit the brakes hard. The car screeched to a stop about 15 feet from him. Her heart was pounding. She could see his face clearly now. His eyes were just looking at her. Completely still. And that smile never wavered. Every instinct she had was telling her to turn around, hit the gas, and get out of there. But her phone was in the passenger seat, and she was about to reach for it when the man tilted his head. Slowly. Like he was curious about something. Sarah screamed. She threw the car into reverse and hit the accelerator. The tires spun and squealed and grabbed the asphalt, and she flew backward, her eyes still locked on the figure in the road. The smile was still there. And then just before she rounded a curve and lost sight of him, she saw something that would stay with her forever. He raised his arm, slowly, and he waved at her, that same smile never breaking. Sarah drove straight to the police station. She was hyperventilating when she stumbled out of her car. Officer Watts took her statement, and for the first time they had a real report. A real eyewitness account. Jenny Watts decided to set up a patrol. She and another officer would watch that stretch of road every night for a week. 4 nights passed. Nothing. On the 5th night, Officer Watts was sitting in her car, parked near where everyone had reported seeing the figure. It was almost midnight. The road was completely dark except for her headlights. The forest on both sides was thick and black. And then she saw him. He was walking toward her car, not running, not hurrying, just walking down the center of the road. With that same smile on his face, Jenny reached for her radio, but her hands were shaking. She could see his face now, even in the darkness. His smile was gentle, almost friendly, but there was something wrong with it, something that made her stomach turn. He kept walking closer. She got her hand on her radio and was about to call for backup when something made her stop. She looked at his hands. Both of his hands were visible as he walked. He wasn't carrying anything. He was empty-handed, completely harmless looking. He stopped about 20 feet from her car window. He looked at her. That smile never changed. And then he did something that made her blood go cold. He mouthed the words, "Let me in." Jenny didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She turned on the ignition and drove straight at him. She saw him clearly in her headlights, and at the last second she realized something. He wasn't moving. He wasn't getting out of the way. She felt the impact. A thud. She screamed and hit the brakes. She threw the car in reverse, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror, expecting to see a body in the road behind her. There was nothing, just empty pavement. She looked in front of her. There was nothing there either. No body, no blood. No sign that she'd hit anything at all. Jenny drove straight back to the station and quit her job that night. She never told anyone exactly what she saw, but she made it clear she was done. Something about that road had broken something in her. Officer Derek Paulson, Derek from the hardware store, was also a part-time officer. He was assigned to patrol the road after that. On his second night, he called in. He said he needed to take a personal day. He never came back. He moved away 3 weeks later. No one really saw him leave. His house was just suddenly empty. But here's the thing that really gets me. The smiling man. He stopped appearing after that. No more reports. The road went back to normal. People started driving it again. Life moved on, except it didn't, not really. Because about a month later, someone went to Derek's house to check on him. And they found his landlord had cleared it out. But on the kitchen table, they found a Polaroid photograph, just left there. In the photo, you could see a figure, standing in the dark, smiling, and the figure, it looked exactly like Derek Paulson. Story 2. The Walls Remember Kay. So the second story I want to tell you tonight is about a house, not a mansion, not some decrepit haunted estate, just a regular house. A ranch-style home with brown shutters in a town called Millbrook, population around 3,000. The house had been built in 1987. It was on Cranberry Lane, and for most of its existence, it was just a house. People lived there. They moved in, lived their lives, moved out. Normal, quiet, unremarkable. But in 2018, things changed. A family named the Hendersons, mom, dad, 2 kids, Emily and Michael, they moved in. The house had been sitting empty for about 6 months before they bought it. The price was good. The neighborhood was decent. Everything seemed fine. The first week there was nothing unusual. They unpacked. They settled in. The kids explored the neighborhood. Life was normal. But then Michael, he was 12 at the time, Michael started mentioning something to his mom. He said the walls in his room were making noise. His mom didn't think much of it. Old houses settle. They creak. They make sounds. She figured that was all it was. She told Michael it was just the house being old. But Michael was insistent. He said it wasn't creaking. He said it was more like scratching. Soft scratching, but constant. And it always happened at night. He said it sounded like it was coming from inside the walls. His parents checked. They looked at the walls. They called an exterminator. The exterminator found nothing. No termites. No rodents. No insects of any kind. The walls were fine. Michael stopped complaining. Or maybe he just got used to it. His mom didn't ask. About a month in, Emily, she was 15, she started spending a lot of time in the basement. Their mother asked her about it, and Emily just said she was organizing her stuff, setting up a little area to do her homework. Teenagers need their space, you know. But then one night the father, Dale, he went down to the basement to get something from storage, and he found Emily just sitting there. In the dark, not doing anything. Just sitting on an old couch that had been left behind by the previous owners, staring at the wall. He asked her what she was doing, and she looked at him like she was confused by the question. She said, "Just listening." "Listening to what?" he asked. She didn't answer. She just went back upstairs. The mother, Susan, she started noticing other things. She'd find handprints on the inside of the basement window. Not dusty handprints. Clean ones. Like someone had pressed their hands against the glass from inside the basement and it had been cleaned. The glass was spotless everywhere else, but those handprints were perfectly clear. Susan asked the kids about it. They said they didn't know anything about it. One night, Susan was alone in the house. Dale was working late. The kids were at a friend's house, and she was making dinner in the kitchen when she heard something. A noise from the upstairs hallway. She stopped what she was doing and listened. There it was again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Walking down the hallway, back and forth, Susan walked to the foot of the stairs. "Hello?" she called up. The footsteps stopped immediately. No answer. She climbed the stairs slowly. Her heart was already starting to race. She checked each bedroom. All empty. No one there. The closets were empty too. No one in the hallway. No one anywhere. She went downstairs and sat in the living room for the next 4 hours until Dale came home. That's when things started escalating. Michael started sleepwalking. He'd wake up in strange places. Once he was found standing in the basement at 3 a.m, completely asleep with his hands pressed against the wall. Another time his parents found him in the kitchen, just standing at the sink staring out into the dark backyard. Emily became withdrawn. She stopped going to school. She'd just sit in her room for hours, not reading, not doing homework, just sitting. When her mother tried to talk to her about it, Emily would respond in short, quiet answers, like she was barely present, and the scratching in the walls. It got louder, more frequent. It wasn't just at night anymore. It was all the time, coming from different walls in different rooms. The Hendersons tried everything. They called contractors. They had the walls inspected. They were told repeatedly that there was nothing wrong. The structure was sound. There were no animals. There was nothing. But the scratching continued. Dale wanted to move. He brought it up to Susan. He said something felt wrong about the house. They should get out. But Susan was worried about the kids. Moving might stress them out more. Plus, the house market was weird right then. They'd take a loss if they sold now. So they stayed. One night in December, about 4 months after they'd moved in, Susan woke up to find Michael standing at the foot of her bed. Just standing there. In the dark, watching her, she screamed and turned on the light. Michael looked confused. He said he didn't remember getting out of bed. He said he didn't remember going into his parents' room. He was asleep, he said. He was sorry. But here's the thing. When they checked his room, his bed was made perfectly. The sheets were smooth. The pillows were arranged neatly. It didn't look like anyone had been sleeping in it at all. 2 days later, Emily ran away. The police found her 4 miles from the house, walking along a county road. She wasn't even trying to hide or run from them. She was just walking. When they brought her home, Emily didn't speak for 2 weeks. She just sat in her room staring at the walls. When she finally did talk, she told her parents something that chilled them to their core. She said that the walls had been talking to her. Not with words exactly, more like impressions, feelings. She said the house was hungry. It was hungry and it wanted something, and it kept asking her if she could help it. That's when Dale decided. He didn't care about the market. He didn't care about losing money. They were leaving that day. But here's where it gets really weird. When they started packing, they found something. In the basement, behind some loose paneling that Emily had apparently removed, they found scratch marks. Hundreds of them. Deep, desperate scratch marks gouged into the concrete foundation and carved into the foundation over and over in childish handwriting that had been scratched or scraped into the concrete were names, 7 names total. When Dale did research on the house, he found newspaper records from 1994. The original owners of the house, a couple named the Marshalls, they had reported their daughter missing. She was 8 years old. Her name was Sarah Marshall. She had disappeared from the house without a trace. The case was never solved. Over the next hour, Dale and Susan found information about 6 other disappearances. Children, all between ages 7 and 15, all reported missing from that same house or nearby, dating back to 1987, right when the house was built. The Hendersons packed in a frenzy. They left everything they couldn't carry. They got in the car and they drove away. But before they left, Michael did something. He went into the basement one last time. When he came back up, he was pale and shaking. He wouldn't tell anyone what he'd seen or what he'd done down there. The house still stands on Cranberry Lane. No one lives in it now. It's been on the market for over a year. Multiple families have moved in and moved out within days or weeks. The real estate agent who handles the property has changed 3 times. The price keeps dropping, and if you drive past it at night, locals say you can hear it. Coming from inside the walls, that scratching sound. Still scratching, still hungry. Story 3. The Last Passenger. The final story I want to share with you tonight, it's about a bus driver, a man named Robert Hutchins, and it takes place in a town called Ashford, right outside the state line, population around 4,000. Robert had been driving buses for 30 years. 30 years. He knew every road, every stop, every regular passenger. He was one of those people that nobody really notices, but everybody depends on. The kind of person who just becomes part of the landscape of a small town. He drove the evening route, left the station at 4 p.m., came back at 11 p.m. Same route every day, same stops, same mostly empty bus, because let's be honest, not many people in a town this size use the public bus system. Most days, he'd have maybe 3 to 5 passengers. Robert was reliable. He was always on time. He never called in sick. He just did his job quiet and steady, year after year after year. But in March of 2017, something changed. One evening, as Robert was starting his usual route, he noticed something odd. There was a passenger already on the bus, sitting in the back, all the way in the back in the last row, on the passenger side. Robert knew all his regular passengers. This wasn't one of them. He figured this person had gotten on at the depot. Maybe they were new to town, new to taking the bus, no big deal. Robert started driving. The route took him through the downtown area first. 3 stops. Nobody new got on. But when Robert checked the mirror to look at the passenger in back, the person was still there, just sitting, not moving. Something about it made Robert feel uneasy, but he didn't say anything. He just kept driving. As the bus moved through the residential areas, more people got on at the regular stops. Regular people. Mrs. Wong, who got on at 5th and Maple. The Martinez kid who rode the bus to the gym. They took their usual seats scattered throughout the bus. And the figure in the back? Still there. Unmoving. By the time the bus made it to the outlying areas, past the edge of town where the stops got more sparse, the other passengers had all gotten off. It was just Robert and the figure in the back. Robert had driven this route 1,000 times. He could do it in his sleep. But tonight, something felt different. The bus felt too quiet. The silence from the back of the bus felt heavy somehow. At the next stop, nobody got on or off. At the stop after that, same thing. Robert checked his mirror. The figure was still there. Finally, Robert couldn't stand it anymore. He pulled the bus over at a stop. There were no passengers waiting there, just an empty shelter. And he stood up. He turned around to look at the figure in the back. "Last stop," he called out. "Gotta get off here." The figure didn't move, didn't respond. "Hey," Robert said a little louder. "This is the last stop. End of the line." Still nothing. Robert walked toward the back of the bus. As he got closer, his eyes adjusted more and he could see the figure better. It was a woman. Or, it looked like a woman. She was wearing clothes from maybe 30 years ago, a style that seemed very old. Her skin was pale, very pale, almost white. But she wasn't moving, wasn't breathing as far as Robert could tell. "Excuse me," Robert said, his voice wavering a little. "You need to get off. This is the end of the line." The woman slowly turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were wrong, cloudy, unfocused, like she was looking through him rather than at him. Robert took a step back. "I need you to exit the bus. Now." The woman didn't say anything. She just looked at him for a long moment. And then slowly she stood up. Her movements were stiff, unnatural, like she wasn't quite sure how her body worked. She walked toward the front of the bus and Robert followed her, keeping his distance. She exited through the doors, and Robert felt relief wash over him. He watched her walk away in the side mirror. She walked down the sidewalk and then she just stopped, just stood there on the sidewalk perfectly still, facing away from the road. Robert put the bus in gear and drove away. He tried not to think about it for the rest of the shift. He finished. The route went home and told himself he was just tired. Maybe he'd imagined the whole thing, or exaggerated it in his mind. But the next night the woman was back. Same seat. Back of the bus. Same pale skin. Same wrong movements. Robert didn't say anything this time. He just drove the route, trying to ignore her. But he couldn't help checking the mirror every few seconds. She was always there, always still, always just waiting. When they reached the last stop, she got off the same way as before, those stiff, unnatural movements, and walked to the same spot and stood perfectly still, facing away. Robert went home and he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about that woman. Something about her was deeply, fundamentally wrong. On the third night, Robert actually considered not going to work, but he'd never missed a shift in 30 years. He wasn't going to start now. He showed up and started his route, but this time there were two figures on the bus, both in the back. both in the same pale, wrong way. Neither of them moved or responded when Robert spoke to them. He just drove. His hands were shaking on the steering wheel. On the fourth night, there were 3. On the fifth night, 5. On the sixth night, the entire back of the bus was filled with them. Pale, still figures, all facing forward, all watching the road ahead with those cloudy, unfocused eyes. Robert completed the route. He didn't say a word. When they all exited at the final stop, they lined up perfectly, single file, moving in that stiff, jerky way, and they walked to the edge of the parking area and just stood there. Robert sat in the driver's seat for a long time. His heart was pounding. His palms were sweating. He knew something was very wrong. He called the transit authority. He told them he needed a mental health evaluation. He couldn't explain it. He knew how insane it sounded, but he told them he couldn't drive anymore. He was done. 30 years, and he was done. But before they could remove him from the schedule, something happened. A passenger came to the transit authority, one of Robert's regular riders, the Martinez kid. He told them that he'd been riding the evening bus for the past week and something really strange was going on. He said the bus was always more crowded than it used to be. Not in the front where he sat, but in the back. The back was always packed. But here's the thing. When he'd look back there, he could see people, but he couldn't really see them. It was like they were just slightly out of focus. Like they weren't quite there. He said the other day he actually counted. There must have been 40 people in the back of the bus. But when it was their stop, they all got off at the last stop, and he followed them out of curiosity. They didn't go anywhere. They just stood there, in a line, hundreds of them actually, standing perfectly still in that parking area. The Martinez kid said he was never getting on that bus again. The transit authority investigated. They pulled Robert's route video from the security camera on the bus. They watched the footage. There was nothing unusual. Robert driving, a few passengers getting on and off, no crowds in the back, no figures, nothing. But Robert knew what he'd seen. So did that kid. Robert Hutchins never drove a bus again. He retired early, took a big financial hit, but he got out. To this day, if you take that evening bus route in Ashford, drivers will occasionally report something. Figures in the back, not quite solid, not quite there, always getting off at the last stop, always standing perfectly still in that parking area. And locals say that if you drive past that area late at night, you can see them, just standing there. More and more of them every night, waiting for something. Or maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for someone to pick them up again. Thank you for listening to these 3 small-town horror stories. Remember, sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that happen in quiet places where nobody's watching and nobody believes. Sleep well, if you can.